Hello, viewers. Once again, I want to welcome you to the third episode in our series on the Alpha and Omega of apostasy. I'm sure many of you have been enjoying our messages since we started almost a week ago in our channel, Truth for These Times. One of the landmark events in the history of Adventism, yet little known, is the exile of the messenger of the Lord to the Australian continent way back in the 1890s. In fact, many of God's faithful have not known the workings of the enemy. Yet the Bible tells us in the book of 2 Corinthians, chapter 11, verse 14 and 15, thus, "And no marvel, for Satan himself is transformed into an angel of light." The Apostle Paul warned, "Therefore it is no great thing if his ministers also be transformed as the ministers of righteousness." In fact, this scripture solves one of the perplexing issues of why do we find people in the churches or in the church of God who pretend, who appear on the surface to be servants of righteousness, but it's only a pretense. As we move on in our study on the Omega of apostasy, I remember a quote in one of the review of March 17, 1994, by Professor Ginger Harwood, who denied the existence of Jesuit subversives in the Adventist Church. This is what she wrote. "In addition to conspiracies from without, some Adventists have expressed repeated concerns about conspiracies from within. Concerns that some of these external elements might infiltrate the church and subvert it from within, undermining its mission, its identity, and its integrity. Jesuit infiltration has been charged, and certain Adventist leaders have been identified with Rome, the KGB, and communism. A former Adventist pastor, now engaged in private ministry, alleges that the General Conference itself has become the dupe of Rome and is connected to the mafia and secret agencies of the U.S. federal government. While we must not be naive to the machinations of the enemy, we must renounce such far-fetched and unfounded conspiracy theories. Whenever the truth of God is coming home to his people, it's often branded a conspiracy theory so that those who had interest in examining what's happening may pull off by just saying this is just another conspiracy theory. It's important at this point to understand why the great nation of the United States, from which the Church of Adventism grew, because around the year 1620, the Pilgrim Fathers escaped religious bigotry and arrived in America seeking liberty in religious matters because of the persecutions they had in England under King Charles, who was later beheaded by the masses of Britain. One of the respected legal authority, David Dudley Field, once observed, "The greatest achievement ever made in the course of human progress is the total and final separation of church and state. If we had nothing else to boast of, we could lay claim with justice that first among the nations of this country made it an article of organic law that the relations between man and his maker were a private concern into which other men have no right to intrude." And this reminds me what we read in Great Controversy in the chapter Liberty of Conscience Threatened, where Bishop O'Connor, the late O'Connor, says, "Religious liberty is merely endured until the opposite can be carried into effect without peril to the Catholic world." Somewhere around the 1880s, Adventist believers launched a magazine called the American Sentinel. In fact, the first number of the American Sentinel came out in January 1886 with the purpose of preserving religious liberty. And it was printed by the Pacific Press in Oakland, California. Some of the things we should understand is that God allowed a church to flourish in a country that had the most advanced system of liberty ever in the known world. In fact, the government of the United States was established in truth upon the Christian basis, in that its fundamental principles and supreme law were in exact harmony with the provisions announced by Jesus Christ with respect to the total separation that should be maintained between its religion and the jurisdiction of the state. And in this manner, America became to all the world the classical land of religious liberty. Unfortunately, this liberty was not continued for long, for Ellen White introduces us to an episode in her life when she was preaching at Salamanca, New York in 1890, where she says, after one of the meetings, she left for her room, discouraged and sick. She intended to pour out her soul before God and plead for His mercy and for health and strength. She knelt by her chair and in her own words says, "I had not uttered a word when the whole room seemed filled with a soft silver light, and my pain of disappointment and discouragement was removed. I was filled with comfort and hope, the peace of Christ." She had told of receiving a vision. She said, "There are some things presented to me last night concerning the work in Battle Creek." Then she began to talk about other matters, and she did not relate the vision. She later described what had been shown her that evening about plans being made for the church's religious liberty channel, then called the American Sentinel, which had started way back in 1886. This is what she said. "In the night season, I was present in several councils, and there I heard words repeated by influential men to the effect that if the American Sentinel would drop the word Seventh-day Adventist from its column and would say nothing about the Sabbath, the great men of the world will patronize it, it will become popular, and do a bigger work. This looked very pleasing. I saw their countenances brighten, and they began to work on a policy to make the Sentinel a popular success. The whole matter was introduced by men who knew the truth in the chambers of the mind and soul. What's so curious about what Ellen White relates is that later, several years later, in February 24 of 1994, over an interview I mentioned earlier between William Johnson and Roland Exted, who was retiring that time, how is it that what Ellen White said at that time coincides with what Roland Exted says several years later? And this is what Johnson asked him. What do you think was your most important contribution to liberty? And he answered, not their words. Rather, its identification as an unapologetic Adventist magazine. When I became editor, the name Adventist did not appear in Liberty. And editorial policy prohibited articles on doctrine or prophecy. The magazine had become what Ellen White said our religious liberty publication should not be, simply a liberty magazine. And then he proceeded. When I got letters asking whether the magazine was published by the ACLU, American Civil Liberties Union, or the communists, I knew it wasn't doing the Lord much good. The change was not without controversy. Robert Pearson, General Conference President, was told that identifying liberty with the church will kill the magazine. His response, it's not for us to worry about the consequences. It's for us to follow the counsel. One consequence, within a few years, circulation increased from 165,000 copies to more than 500,000. Now, friends, this is very interesting because we are told that that night, after the close of the General Conference session that was sitting at Panther Creek in the year 1891, a small group of men met in one of the offices in the Review and Herald building. At the meeting were representatives of the publishing house that issued the American Sentinel. Also present were representatives of the Religious Liberty Association. They met to discuss and settle a vexing question: the editorial policy of the American Sentinel. Are you seeing the contrast between the time of Ellen White and the time of Roland Exted? Yes, an interesting contrast, because we are told that at that meeting that took place at Panther Creek in 1891, which was a session, we are told that the door was locked, and all agreed that the door would stay locked until the question was settled. Which question? The editorial policy of that paper. A little before 3 on Sunday morning, the meeting ended in a deadlock, with those representing religious liberty insisting that unless Pacific Press agrees to their demands and drops the term Seventh-day Adventist and the Sabbath from the columns of that paper, they will no longer use it as the mouthpiece of the Religious Liberty Association. That meant the paper will cease to exist. They are meeting at a stalemate. They unlocked the door and the men went to their rooms. That very night, that those very things that Ellen White had been shown in vision way back in Salamanca in 1890, a year earlier, before they actually transpired. Meanwhile, at 3 a.m., God sent his messenger to Ellen White's room at 3 a.m. She was aroused from sleep and instructed that she must go to the workers' meeting at 5:30 and present what was shown to her at Salamanca. She arose quickly and wrote for about 2 hours what had been shown to her at Salamanca. The ministers were just getting up from prayer in the tabernacle as Ellen White came in the door with a bundle of manuscripts and her arm. The General Conference president was the speaker, and he addressed her. Sister White, he said, "We are happy to see you. Do you have a message for us?" "Indeed, I do," she said, and stepped to the front. Then she began right where she had left off the day before. She told them that at 3 that morning, she had been aroused from her sleep and instructed to go to the workers' meeting and present what had been shown her at Salamanca. In the vision that was given to White at Salamanca in 1890, she said, "I seemed to be in Patra Creek. I was taken to the review and held an office, and the angel messenger bade me follow me. I was shown to a room where a group of men were earnestly discussing a matter. There was a seal manifest, but not according to knowledge." She told how they were discussing the editorial policy of the American Sentinel. She said, "I saw one of the men take a copy of the Sentinel, hold it high over his head, and say, 'Unless these articles on the Sabbath and the Second Advent come out of this paper, we can no longer use it as the organ of the Religious Liberty Association.'" In fact, she talked for almost an hour, telling what has been shown her in the vision. And folks, it's very important at this point for me to unmask the scheme that made Ellen White to be sent to Australia. So the question is, who sent Ellen White to Australia and why? Those who sent Ellen White to Australia actually reacted to the fact that the prophet of the Lord, the messenger of the Lord, was being shown what was being done in the darkness. And who are some of these people? It included Olsen, the president of the General Conference during that time, and Albion Fox Ballinger, who headed the religious liberty work. These are the men who exiled the prophet of the Lord to Australia. And it's even important to know what were the consequences of Ellen White to Australia. What was the consequences of her exile to that land? Because at that point, when she confronted these men at the meeting of 1891, Brother Ballinger arose and said, "I was in that council meeting, which was held last night until a late hour. And Sister White has described it accurately. The very words she says she had spoken was spoken last night. I was on the wrong side of the question and now take my position on the right side." In fact, this was just a pretense, because the very man who confessed that he was on the wrong side is the one who secretly took a vote that Ellen White, because she is a messenger of the Lord, and revealing to the brethren some of the secret schemes of the agents of Rome in that church. Therefore, she should be sent to Australia. In fact, Ellen White went to Australia. And before she could go, she said that indeed the Lord has not revealed to these men that he should go and work in Australia, but that they were tired of our testimonies. In fact, she prayed for several months. In the month of April, May, June, July, August, September, October, November, she got no reply for her prayers. And then Ellen decided that even though she did not receive a reply for her prayers from the Lord, and reasoned that the Lord can overrule events in such a manner that she will turn a mistake, a trick of Adventists to become a blessing. And indeed, that trick became a great blessing, for Ellen White did a great work in Australia, doing the work of the Lord. And we do understand, for those who have read the writings of the Spirit of Prophecy and the Bible, that Satan hates God's holy law. And Satan hates religious liberty, that which makes men and women to worship God according to the dictates of conscience. And that's why the war against religious liberty has never abated. In fact, in an editorial in the October 7, 1953 issue of the Advent Review, entitled Evanston Storm Warnings, it states, slowly, there is developing among the American churches apprehension lest next year's assembly of the World Council be a stormy one. So wide and deep are the differences on some of the topics of the Evanston agenda that the debate is likely to be prolonged and may be heated. Was there a debate that was prolonged and heated? We may not know, but we know of one thing for sure, that when it held its major convention in Evanston, about 5 slogans were evident. And which slogans were these? By the World Council of Churches, do not call us a council of denominations, for we were born to destroy denominations. We intend to take over the work of foreign mission work of all denominations. 3, we propose to use this new revised standard version, which is our child, to be our constitution and atomic bomb, to bring all other Bibles throughout the world in harmony with it. We are going to build along plans for a bigger and a better world. There is only one divine service left, none like it was ever conceived in time elsewhere, to lift the human race up to God. That is the sacrifice of the Mass. The sacrifice of the Mass. Do you get that? This indeed reveals to us that the World Council of Churches, formed in 1948 as an ecumenical body, was not dedicated just to unite the churches. Its purpose was to destroy the Advent movement, the church that God had raised to take the truth to the whole known world. Because even in the time of Ellen White, we had ecumenical bodies such as the National Reform Movement, which was pushing for the enactment of the Sunday law. And writing Testimonies, Volume 5, page 715, Ellen White says, when the National Reformers began to urge measures to restrict religious liberty, our leading men should have been alive to the situation and should have labored earnestly to counteract these efforts. It's not in the order of God that light has been kept from our people, the very present truth which they needed for this time. Not all our ministers who are giving the third angel's message really understand what constitutes that message. So then we should ask, what about those who warn the world about the activities of the World Council of Churches? Are they giving present truth? Is it meat in due season? Is it a message that God's people should learn at this time? Is it something different? If she were here today, I feel this is what Ellen White could have said. The World Council of Churches has been regarded by some as of very little importance, that some have thought to deceive members that they only attend one council meetings to observers as observers while they are united with the papacy. In fact, many Adventist leaders who attend the meetings of the World Council of Churches, they deceive members that they go there as observers. Observers of what? They are a part and parcel of the ecumenical movement. That's why she could write in December 1888 that the peculiar work of the third angel has not been seen in its importance. God meant that his people should be far in advance of what they are today. But now, when the time has come for them to spring into action, they have the getting ready to do. When Satan made his advances, it was high time for the watchmen on the walls of Zion to arouse and counteract his efforts to obtain the advantage. It's not in the order of God that light has been kept from our people, the very present truth which they needed for this time. Not all our ministers who are giving the third angel's message really understand what constitutes that message. And this is the reason I have to repeat this quote, because it's a warning against the ecumenical movement. In fact, this tells us that Ellen White was exiled to Australia for the simple reason that she was revealing to the people of God the importance of religious liberty. And the fact that what she writes coincides with what Ronald Hexted wrote several years later tells us that the struggle for religious liberty is great. In fact, in the month of January, in the Adventist churches all over the world, they have a special day called Religious Liberty Day. And even an offering is made for religious liberty. But little to God's people know that this system has nothing to do with religious liberty and much to do with ecumenism. The process of bringing all the churches, the people of the world together, that they may worship on one day in a week. That the process, the whole thing is about the enactment of Sunday law. Brethren, fellow viewers, my listeners, whoever is listening to this at this moment should consider this. We are living at a time when the present truth should be preached in the churches, when the people of God should be enlightened about where we are in prophetic history. But unfortunately, sermons come year in, year out. Celebrations come. Camp meetings come, like this season now of the camp meetings. People come and preach different messages. The very present truth that the people of God should know at this time, that should prepare for them for eternity, is not preached. We hear only fables. We hear only stories. We hear things that should even not exist among the people of God. Friends, we are living in perilous times. We are living in times when the trumpet should be given a proper sound. You have now heard today why the servant of the Lord was exiled to Australia, where she spent almost 10 years. And when she came back, she introduced a reform in the Church of God, which was only effected shortly. We'll hear more from this channel, Truth for These Times, on what God wants his people to do at this moment. Welcome.